While my mother screamed at my father over who would inherit grandmother Eleanor's antique silver tea set, I sat quietly in the back seat of my 2010 sedan. They didn't even notice I was there. They certainly didn't notice the thick cream envelope resting on my lap. I slid my finger under the seal. Inside, Eleanor's shaky handwriting offered a final warning. Don't let them see you have anything, Haley. People's true nature only shows when they think you have nothing left to lose. Behind that letter was a deed, a trust, and a balance sheet confirming I was the sole heir to a $52,400,000 empire. Before we dive into Haley's double life, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My workshop in Seattle smelled of linseed oil, stripped varnish, and the kind of deep settling dust that gets into your pores and stays there. To my family, it smelled like failure. I spent 12 hours a day here, sanding down centuries-old mahogany and repairing joinery that had been crafted before the invention of the light bulb. It was manual labor. It was dirty, and to my mother, Angela, it was an embarrassment she tried desperately to edit out of her life. She stopped by on a Tuesday, driving the pearl-white luxury SUV she leased but couldn't actually afford. She stood in the doorway, clutching her designer bag tight against her chest, as if the sawdust in the air might infect her cashmere coat. I didn't stop sanding. I kept the rhythm steady, the rasp of the sandpaper filling the silence. She watched me for a moment, her expression a mix of pity and distaste. Then she walked over, opened her purse, and placed a $20 bill on my workbench. Just for gas, she said, her voice dropping to that whisper people use in hospitals. I know things are tight this month, Haley. Just take it. I looked at the $20. Then I looked at the chair. I was restoring a piece commissioned by a tech billionaire that would net me $15,000 upon completion. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and put the bill in my pocket. It was easier to let her believe I needed her charity than to explain that I had just acquired the commercial building across the street through a shell company. I was the silent architect of a portfolio they couldn't even comprehend, but all they saw was the dirt under my fingernails. The contrast with my brother Nathan couldn't have been sharper. While I was stripping paint in overalls, Nathan was sitting in a glass-walled office in Bellevue playing CEO. He called himself a crypto visionary. My parents called him the future. They loved visiting his office. They loved the espresso machine in the lobby and the panoramic views of the skyline. They didn't understand the business, mostly because there wasn't one, but they understood the aesthetic. It looked like success. It looked like the return on their investment. I knew the truth about Nathan's empire because I made it my business to know. I knew he was burning through capital at a rate of $40,000 a month. I knew his investors were actually just my parents slowly liquidating their assets to keep his lights on. He was a furnace, and they were shoveling their retirement into him, convinced that any day now he would ignite. That afternoon, after my mother left to have lunch with Nathan, I wiped my hands on a rag and pulled my laptop out from under a stack of architectural blueprints. I logged into the secure portal for H.E. Holdings. A notification popped up, a request for a bridge loan from a failing fintech startup in Bellevue. Nathan's startup. He was asking for $200,000 to cover payroll and a lease payment on a Lamborghini he claimed was a business expense. I stared at the screen. My mother had just given me $20 out of pity. Now her golden child was begging my company for a lifeline. I didn't feel smug. I felt cold. I denied the loan with a single click. They wanted to believe in the glitz of Nathan's world and the dust of mine. I decided to let them. I closed the laptop, picked up my sandpaper, and went back to work. Let them keep their illusions a little longer. The dust was the only thing real in this family anyway. It happened over a Sunday dinner I wasn't invited to, but I saw the aftermath on my monitor Monday morning. Nathan had pitched them his newest obsession: non-fungible tokens, digital art, the future of ownership. He used words like blockchain and decentralization to dazzle two people who still typed with their index fingers. He told them he needed seed capital for a platform that would revolutionize the art world. He didn't have a business plan. He had a slide deck and a smile that had been getting him out of trouble since he was 6 years old. I watched the transaction ripple through the financial system from my office above the workshop. My father Thomas had liquidated his entire 401k. My mother Angela had cashed out the life insurance policy meant for their old age. $400,000. Gone in a single wire transfer. They weren't just betting on a horse. They were betting the farm on a unicorn that didn't exist. I sat there staring at the glowing numbers, and I didn't feel the urge to call them. I didn't feel the panic a daughter should feel watching her parents commit financial suicide. I felt the cold, hard click of a lock falling into place. For years I had asked myself, why? Why did they pour everything into Nathan, the boy who couldn't finish a semester of community college while refusing to help me buy a set of chisels for trade school? Why did they look at his failures and see potential but look at my steady, profitable work and see embarrassment? It wasn't about love. It was about vanity. Nathan was their golden child because he was their narcissistic extension. He represented the life they felt they deserved: flashy, effortless, high status. When they looked at him, they saw a reflection of their own grandiose delusions. They saw the lottery ticket that would finally prove they were special. Investing in him was investing in their own ego. But when they looked at me, covered in sawdust, smelling of solvent, working with my hands, they saw reality. They saw the manual labor they thought they were too good for. I was the scapegoat not because I was bad, but because I was real. I was the mirror that showed them their own mediocrity, the slow, unglamorous grind of actual work. They hated me for it. They needed Nathan to succeed so they wouldn't have to admit that life requires effort. They needed me to fail so they could feel superior to the work I did. So I let the transfer go through. I sat in my chair, the leather creaking softly, and I watched the digital trail of their retirement fund vanish into Nathan's account. I knew exactly where it would go: a penthouse lease, a marketing party, a PR firm to hype a product that hadn't been built yet. I was the silent auditor of their ruin. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Haley, we're moving some assets around for an investment opportunity. Might need to delay the property tax payment on the shop building this month. You can handle it, right?" He still thought he owned my building. He thought he was doing me a favor by letting me pay the taxes on a property he believed was his. I didn't correct him. I typed back a single word. Sure, I paid the taxes. I paid the insurance. I kept my name off the public records and kept my silence. They were buying a ticket to the moon. I was just making sure I owned the ground they were going to crash into. 6 months later, the crash wasn't just predictable, it was violent. Nathan's NFT platform didn't revolutionize the art world. It got hacked, draining what little liquidity it had, and then the market collapsed. The value of his digital assets went to zero overnight. He didn't just lose the money, he lost the illusion. My parents didn't come to me for comfort. They came for blood. They stormed into my workshop on a Tuesday afternoon looking like survivors of a shipwreck who had decided to blame the ocean. My father Thomas was red-faced, veins bulging in his neck. My mother Angela looked frantic, her designer coat buttoned wrong. Nathan trailed behind them, looking sullen and terrified, like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for someone else to fix it. "Get out," my father barked. He didn't even say hello, he just pointed at the door. "We need you to clear out your things. We're selling the building." I put down my chisel. I wiped my hands on my apron, taking my time. "Selling the building?" I asked, my voice calm. "Yes, selling it," he shouted, stepping closer. "Nathan has a liquidity issue, a temporary setback. We need cash to cover a margin call and restart operations. This property is the last asset we have. We've already called a developer. They're offering cash for the land. So pack up your little hobby shop. You have 24 hours. I looked at them. I looked at the way they stood in my space, surrounded by the tools I had bought, the wood I had sourced, the life I had built. They weren't asking. They were taking. They were willing to bulldoze my livelihood to throw one last lifeline to the son who had already drowned them. "You can't sell this building," I said. "Excuse me," my mother stepped forward, her voice shrill. "This is our property, Haley. We let you play here because we felt sorry for you. But now your brother needs real help. Stop being selfish. Do you have any idea what he's going through? He was trying to build a future for this family." "He gambled your retirement on JPEGs," I said. "And now you want to evict me to pay his gambling debts." "It's not gambling," Nathan yelled, his voice cracking. "It's high-risk venture capital. You wouldn't understand. You just sand tables all day." My father kicked the leg of a Louis XIV chair I had spent 3 weeks restoring. It snapped with a dry, sickening crack. I flinched, but I didn't move. That chair was worth $12,000. He had just destroyed it because he was angry, because he felt entitled to destroy anything of mine if it served him. That was the moment. That was the click. The final tumbler falling into place. "You have 24 hours, my father hissed. "Or I'll change the locks myself and throw this junk in the dumpster." I looked at the broken chair leg on the floor. I looked at Nathan smirking in the background, safe behind the parents who would burn the world to keep him warm. Okay, I said. I'll be out tomorrow. They left, slamming the door so hard the dust motes danced in the air. I stood there in the silence. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I walked over to the broken chair and picked up the piece of wood. It was ruined. But the building wasn't. I went upstairs to my office. I opened the safe. I pulled out the deed to the building. The deed that listed H.E. Holdings as the owner. The deed I had signed 6 months ago when I bought the property from the previous landlord, who was happy to sell to a quiet tenant with cash. My parents thought they still owned it because they had owned the LLC that originally held the title. They didn't know that the LLC had been dissolved years ago for non-payment of fees and the property had gone to auction. I had bought it then. I had let them believe the lie because it was easier than explaining my wealth. But now the lie was over. They wanted to evict me. They wanted to sell my home to save their golden boy. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I drafted a legal notice. Attempted fraudulent sale of property. I attached a copy of the deed. I didn't send it to them. I sent it to the developer they had contacted. And then I drafted a second document, a notice of foreclosure on the loans I had bought. They wanted a sale. I would give them a sale. I would give them a bankruptcy hearing that would strip them bare. I printed the documents. The printer hummed in the quiet office. It sounded like justice. The night before the bankruptcy hearing, my loft above the workshop was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the laser printer. It was spitting out pages warm and sharp-edged. Deeds. Promissory notes. Loan agreements. I organized them into a black leather binder, each section tabbed with color-coded precision. To the world, this was just a stack of paper. To my family, it was an execution order. I sat at my desk, a cup of black coffee cooling near my elbow. I opened the spreadsheet titled H.E. Holdings Master Asset List. The numbers were staggering. My parents owed $18,500,000. They had leveraged every asset they owned, the mansion in Bellevue, the beach cottage, their cars, even their life insurance to fund Nathan's delusions. They had dug a hole so deep that sunlight couldn't reach the bottom, and then they had handed Nathan a shovel. But as I stared at the glowing columns, the numbers started to blur. I wasn't just auditing their finances, I was auditing my life. I realized then that there were two ledgers. There was the one the bank saw filled with missed payments and accrued interest. And then there was the invisible ledger, the one I had been keeping in my head since I was 7 years old. I started tallying the entries. Item 1. My high school graduation. They left 20 minutes early because Nathan was bored and wanted to go to the arcade. Cost. The memory of looking into the crowd and seeing empty seats. Item 2. The time I won the state award for historical restoration. My mother looked at the plaque and asked if I was still playing with trash. Cost. The pride I had to swallow until it turned into acid in my stomach. Item 3. The thousands of times I was told to be understanding when Nathan stole my allowance, crashed my car, or insulted my work. Cost. My self-respect drafted over and over again to cover his overdrafts. Item 4. The hope. That was the most expensive line item. The hope that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just quiet enough, if I was just successful enough, they would finally see me. I had spent decades paying into that account, investing my love and my loyalty, waiting for a return that was never going to come. I looked at the broken leg of the Louis XIV chair sitting on my workbench downstairs. That was the final entry. The account was closed. They were overdrawn. I picked up a pen and signed the affidavit of ownership. My hand didn't shake. There was no grief left, only the cold clarity of a forensic accountant closing a fraudulent business. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't the sister who could be bullied into silence. I was the primary creditor. I was the landlord they had tried to evict. I was the bank they had tried to rob. I placed the affidavit in the binder and snapped the rings shut. The sound echoed in the empty room like a gunshot. I packed the binder into my briefcase. I checked my suit for the morning charcoal gray tailored intimidating. I wasn't going to court to ask for an apology. I was going to court to collect. The invisible ledger was full, and tomorrow the balance was due. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. My family arrived 5 minutes late, sweeping in with the entitled air of people who believed the rules were merely suggestions. My father, Thomas, adjusted his tie, looking annoyed rather than worried. My mother, Angela, wore oversized sunglasses indoors, treating the bankruptcy hearing like a distasteful social event she had been forced to attend. Nathan slouched in the chair beside them, scrolling on his phone, clearly expecting a bailout or a standard restructuring deal that would let him keep playing entrepreneur. They glanced at me sitting in the back row wearing my charcoal gray suit. My mother frowned, mouthing the word why, but she didn't come over. They assumed I was there to beg or maybe just to watch the show. They had no idea I had written the script. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Vance entered, a woman with eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She sat down and opened the file. Case number 4928. Debtor Thomas and Angela Sterling. Primary creditor, H.E. Holdings. My father leaned toward his lawyer. "Where is this H.E. Holdings rep? Let's get this over with." "Is a representative for H.E. Holdings present?" Judge Vance asked, scanning the room. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. It was heavy, thick, and suffocating. Nathan looked around, bored. My mother tapped her foot. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor was the only noise in the room. "I am, Your Honor." My father turned around, his face twisting into a sneer. "Haley, sit down. The judge is calling for the creditor, not the audience." "I heard her," I said, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room. I walked past the wooden gate. I walked past my parents, who were looking at me with a mix of confusion and irritation. I placed my black binder on the plaintiff's table. "Haley Evans, sole proprietor of H.E. Holdings." "This is a joke," Nathan scoffed loud enough for the stenographer to pause. "She restores furniture. She doesn't own a holding company." Judge Vance looked over her glasses. "Miss Evans has filed the appropriate affidavits of ownership. She holds the deed to the commercial property at 404 Pine, the mortgage on your primary residence at 88 Crestview, and the outstanding business loans for." She squinted at the document. "Visionary Crypto LLC." The air left the room. It didn't hiss. It vanished. My mother gripped the table, her knuckles turning white. My father looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. He didn't see the daughter he could bully. He saw the predator he hadn't noticed in the tall grass. "You," he whispered. "You bought the debt." "I bought it all," I said, turning to face them. "I own the house you sleep in. I own the car Nathan drove here. I own the credit cards you used to buy that suit." "But..." Why, my mother stammered, tears welling up, not from sadness but from terror. "To ruin us." "If I wanted to ruin you, I would have foreclosed yesterday," I said coldly. "I didn't come here to destroy you. I came to restructure you." I opened the binder. The snap of the rings echoed like a gavel strike. "You are insolvent. Your assets are gone. But I am offering a settlement. A rehabilitation plan. You will sign over the deed to the mansion immediately. You will surrender all luxury vehicles. And you..." I looked at Nathan, who had shrunk into his seat, looking very small and very young. "You are cut off. No more loans. No more startups. You will work a real job or you will starve." "You can't do this," Nathan squeaked. "I am the bank," I said. "I can do whatever I want. Sign the agreement or I seize everything by noon." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was absolute. It was the sound of a golden idol smashing against the floor. They looked at the papers. They looked at me, and then with shaking hands they reached for the pens. The move took place on a drizzly Thursday morning. There were no movers in uniformed shirts, no climate-controlled trucks. Just a rented van and the few boxes I allowed them to keep. I stood by the gate of the Bellevue mansion watching my parents walk out for the last time. My mother Angela wasn't wearing her heels. She was wearing sneakers and she looked smaller, as if the house had been the only thing holding her upright. My father carried a box of kitchen supplies, his back bent under the weight of a reality he had avoided for 40 years. They climbed into the van. I drove. The silence in the vehicle was heavy, filled with the unspoken questions of where they were going. I hadn't told them. I drove past the luxury condos they hoped for. I drove past the mid-range suburbs they expected. I kept driving until the lawns got smaller and the fences got rusty. When I pulled up to the curb at 402 Maple Street, my mother gasped. It wasn't a scream. It was the sound of a lung collapsing. She stared out the window at the small, single-story house with peeling yellow paint and a porch that sagged on the left side. "No," she whispered. "Haley, no. Not here." "Yes," I said, putting the van in park. "Here." It wasn't just a run-down house. It was the house she grew up in. The house she had spent 30 years lying about, pretending she came from money, pretending she hadn't clawed her way out of this exact neighborhood. I had bought it from a distant cousin months ago, knowing this day might come. "You can't do this," she cried, turning to me. "This place, it's humiliating. Everyone will know we failed." "Everyone already knows," I said. "This isn't about humiliation, Mom. It's about truth. You spent your whole life running from this porch, building a fortress of debt to hide who you are. Now you're going to live here. You're going to plant a garden. You're going to talk to the neighbors. You're going to stop pretending." My father looked at the house, then at me. "And Nathan?" "Nathan is at his new job," I said. "The logistics warehouse on 4th. He's loading trucks, 12-hour shifts, $15 an hour." "He'll break," my mother sobbed. "His hands. He's not built for that." "Then he will rebuild himself," I said. "Just like I did." I got out of the van and opened the back doors. I looked at them, two people stripped of their varnish, raw and exposed. This was the philosophy I lived by in my shop, the dignity of the dust. When a piece of furniture is rotten, you don't paint over it. You don't gild it. You strip it. You take the sandpaper and you grind away the layers of lacquer and dirt until you find the raw wood underneath. It's violent work. It creates a mess. It looks like destruction. But it is the only way to save the piece. "I'm not punishing you," I told them as I handed my father a box of clothes. "I'm restoring you. You've been covered in layers of lies and ego for so long you forgot what the grain looked like. You're going to hate me today. You might hate me for a year. But one day when you sleep through the night because you don't have to worry about a lie being discovered, you'll understand." I watched them walk up the path to the yellow house. My mother stepped over a crack in the sidewalk she probably remembered from childhood. She didn't look back. She just walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the only thing she had left. Reality. 1 year later, the shop smelled different. It still smelled of sawdust and varnish, but the anxious tang of desperation was gone. I sat on a stool, running my hand over the arm of a newly restored rocking chair. The grain was smooth, the finish flawless. I picked up my phone. A text from my father. "Tomatoes are coming in early this year. Mom's making sauce this weekend. Stop by if you want a jar." I smiled. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. But it was real. My parents were still, my parents flawed, sometimes annoying, occasionally delusional, but they were grounded. They lived within their means. They talked about the weather and the neighbors instead of crypto and country clubs. Nathan was still working at the warehouse. He had been promoted to shift supervisor. He was tired all the time and his hands were calloused, but when he looked at me, he didn't look through me. He saw me. I looked at the framed photo of grandmother Eleanor on my desk. Her eyes seemed to twinkle as if she knew all along that the only way to save the family was to let it break. I touched the glass. "Thank you," I whispered. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need them to call me a genius or a savior. I just needed them to be real. And now finally they were. I was the architect of my own peace, and I had built it from the ground up, using the only materials that lasted: truth, work, and the courage to say no. I picked up my sandpaper and went back to work. There was always more to restore. Haley's story proves that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face their own mess. If you've ever had to be the bad guy to save yourself, share this story. And follow for more tales of hidden strength and quiet justice.